It was an ordinary afternoon when I received the letter from my dad. The envelope, sealed with his familiar handwriting, felt heavier than usual. I thought it was just another update about family matters or maybe some financial documents he needed me to sign. But when I tore it open and saw the first line, "You're no longer part of the family trust," my world came crashing down. I sat there, stunned. The letter shaking in my hands as my mind raced to process what I had just read. How could this happen? I had always believed I was part of the family, someone who mattered. My dad and we weren't incredibly close, but I never expected something like this. There had to be some mistake, right? A misunderstanding. Maybe. I read the letter again, hoping the words would change, but they didn't. The shock left me speechless, and I struggled to comprehend the depth of what this meant. Had I done something wrong? Why hadn't he told me anything before? My thoughts were a jumble of questions and confusion. This wasn't just a simple family issue, it was something deeper, something I wasn't prepared for. I couldn't sit still. My heart was pounding as the words from the letter echoed in my head. I needed answers, and I needed them now. I paced around the room, feeling the weight of uncertainty press down on me. How could this happen? Why hadn't my father ever mentioned this before? Was this some kind of test? I grabbed my phone, dialing his number without thinking. The phone rang, but there was no answer. Of course, he wasn't picking up. Why would he? He had just severed a major connection, probably without even a second thought. I sat back down, staring at the letter in front of me. My hands were clammy, but I forced myself to read it again, more carefully this time. Maybe there was something I had missed, some explanation buried in the words. But all it said was that I was no longer part of the family trust, with no details, no reasons. Feeling desperate, I decided to confront him. I couldn't let this go unanswered. The next morning, I went to his house, my heart racing with every step. I couldn't even begin to imagine what I was going to say. "Dad, why did you do this? What did I do wrong?" The words felt foreign in my mouth, but they were the only ones I could think of. When I arrived, he was there, sitting in his favorite chair by the window, as if nothing had changed. He didn't even look up when I entered. "Dad," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. He finally looked up, his face unreadable, and for a moment, I thought he might say anything to explain himself, but he didn't. I held up the letter, my hands shaking. "What is this? Why did you do this to me?" He sighed, slowly putting his coffee cup down. "It's not something I can explain easily, but you need to understand that this decision was made for a reason." My chest tightened. What could possibly justify this? The words hung in the air between us, thick with tension. I needed to know the truth no matter how hard it was to hear. "Tell me," I demanded, my voice trembling but firm. "Tell me the truth." The tension in the room was suffocating, and I could feel my father's reluctance to speak. But I couldn't back down. I needed to know the truth. What did I do? "Dad, why am I no longer part of the family trust?" I asked again, my voice steady but heavy with desperation. He hesitated, then sighed, his eyes softening for a brief moment. "It's not as simple as you think, son. There are things about this family, about me, that you don't understand. Things that you need to know, but I've kept hidden for a long time." My heart raced as I braced myself for whatever he was about to say. What could possibly be so important that it would change everything? He looked down at his hands, his fingers interlaced, as if gathering the strength to reveal something he had kept buried for years. Finally, he spoke. his voice quieter than usual. "You've always thought of our family as perfect, right?" he asked, his eyes locking onto mine with an intensity I had never seen before. That everything was as it seemed on the surface, but the truth is, there's more beneath it. Much more. I felt a chill run down my spine. What was he talking about? What secrets could there be? My father had always been a man of integrity, a respected figure in our community, and a loving father. To hear him speak like this was completely out of character. It was as if a whole other side of him was suddenly being revealed, and I wasn't sure I was ready to hear it. "The family trust isn't just about wealth or assets," he continued, his voice heavy with regret. "It's a tool to protect our family's legacy. But for years, I've been holding on to things that should have been dealt with long ago. Your mother, and the choices she made. Choices that left scars that none of us ever talked about. I kept it hidden, even from you, because I didn't want you to lose faith in everything you thought you knew about us. I froze. My mother. The idea that my father was hiding something so significant about her, something that had been kept in the shadows all these years, felt like a punch to the gut. I had always thought of my parents as the epitome of stability and love, their relationship unshakable. But now, as my father's words sunk in, everything I had believed was crumbling. "What do you mean?" "Dad, what did Mom do?" I asked, my voice trembling. His eyes darted away from mine, his expression hardened. "I didn't want to tell you this, but your mother made decisions, financial decisions, that put us at risk. There was a time when we nearly lost everything. The family trust was meant to protect us, to keep us safe from the consequences of her actions." The weight of his words hit me like a ton of bricks. My mind raced, trying to piece together the story he was telling me. My mother, the woman I had always idolized, had made mistakes that had jeopardized everything. I couldn't wrap my head around it. What kind of mistakes, I asked, the words barely escaping my lips. My father took a deep breath, then slowly explained. She got involved in business ventures that were risky, decisions that we could never afford to make. She didn't consult me, didn't tell me about it until it was too late. When things started to fall apart, I had to take control of the situation. I protected the family, but there were consequences. I had to make difficult decisions. And that's where the trust came into play. I sat there, stunned into silence. The world I had known, the foundation of my life, had just been shattered. My mother had been hiding something so monumental, and now my father's actions severing me from the family trust made a twisted kind of sense. "But why me? Why cut me out?" I whispered, feeling the sting of betrayal. Why wasn't I told sooner? He looked at me with a mix of sorrow and regret. "I didn't want you to carry the burden of our mistakes, but I realize now that I should have trusted you. I should have let you in on the truth from the beginning. You deserve to know what happened, and you deserve to have a say in what happens next." The room fell silent as the weight of my father's revelations sank in. I was no longer just a son now. I was part of a legacy of mistakes, of hidden truths, and a tangled web of secrets. The path ahead was unclear, but one thing was certain: everything I thought I knew about my family, my identity, was now in question. I had to decide what to do with the truth I had uncovered, no matter how painful it might be. The days following my father's confession felt like a blur of emotions. My mind kept replaying his words, the truth he had revealed, over and over. I couldn't quite process everything, and yet I couldn't escape it either. The more I thought about it, the more I questioned everything the man I thought I knew as my father, the family I had looked up to, and even my own identity. The image of a perfect family had been shattered, and now I was left grappling with what to do next. Part of me wanted to turn my back on him. How could I trust him again after everything he had kept hidden for so long? He had betrayed my trust, and more importantly, he had taken away something I had never even realized was important. The belief that our family was solid, untouchable, protected by something unbreakable. He had taken that from me, and I felt it in every fiber of my being. But there was another part of me, the part that still saw the man who had raised me, the man who had been there through my childhood, my achievements, my failures. My father had always been my hero, and even now, despite everything, I could still feel a flicker of that admiration deep down. Maybe he had made mistakes, big ones, to be sure, but hadn't I, too, made my fair share of errors in judgment over the years? Wasn't I, too, a product of my upbringing, influenced by the choices of those who raised me? The internal battle raged on. How could I move forward? How could I rebuild what had been broken if I wasn't sure of anything anymore? The wound in my heart was fresh, raw, and there was a deep, lingering anger I couldn't shake off. But there was also something else, an aching desire to understand him, to see beyond the mistakes, to see the man who had always been my father, despite everything. I found myself sitting in the living room one evening, the weight of the silence between us pressing down on me. My father was there, too, but we hadn't spoken much since our last conversation. He seemed distant, as though he was giving me space to process everything. But I knew that we couldn't keep living in this limbo, with the distance between us growing wider every day. If I was ever going to heal, we had to talk. We had to figure out where we stood with each other. Taking a deep breath, I stood up and walked toward him. He looked up at me, his expression unreadable, his hands clasped together in front of him. There was a vulnerability in his eyes that I hadn't seen before, a sign that he, too, was struggling with what had happened. I don't know what to do. "Dad," I said quietly, my voice betraying the uncertainty I felt. "I'm angry at you. I don't know how to forgive you for what you've done, but I don't want to lose you." He let out a heavy sigh, his face softening. "I don't expect you to forgive me right away, son. I don't even know if I can forgive myself for keeping these secrets from you. But I want to try. I want to rebuild what we've lost, even if it takes time." I could see the sincerity in his eyes, the weight of the regret in his voice. It was clear that he didn't want to lose me, that he was just as lost as I was in this tangled mess of emotions. And for the first time since the bombshell was dropped, I felt a flicker of hope. "Maybe we can start over," I suggested hesitantly. "Not everything has to go back to the way it was, but we can figure this out together." For a moment, he said nothing, just looked at me with a mixture of relief and gratitude. Then, finally, he nodded. "I'd like that. More than you know." We didn't have all the answers yet, and I wasn't naive enough to think that everything would be fine overnight. The road ahead would be long, and there would be moments of doubt, of anger, and maybe even more pain. But for the first time, I realized that the most important thing was that we were both willing to try. And sometimes, that's all it takes to start healing, to take the first step, no matter how uncertain the path may be. As I sat down next to him, the weight on my chest seemed to lift just a little. Maybe there was a way back. Maybe there was a way to rebuild, even if it meant starting from scratch. But I was ready to try. For him. For me. For us. The weeks that followed our conversation marked the beginning of a new chapter, not just in my relationship with my father, but in my own life. I had started to see things differently, and in a way, I was grateful for the painful revelations. They had forced me to confront my own feelings, my identity, and what I truly wanted out of life. For the first time in years, I felt like I was standing on my own 2 feet, ready to carve out my own path, regardless of what had happened in the past. I began to make choices for myself, ones that didn't involve my father's expectations or the shadow of the family trust. It wasn't easy. The pull of everything I had known, the comforts of the family legacy, was strong. But I had realized that, for too long. I had been living in the comfort of what I thought was secure, what I thought was my future. I had taken it for granted, assuming that everything would always be the same. But the truth was, life was unpredictable, and sometimes the things that seemed the most secure could be the ones that would betray you the most. I started by taking control of my finances. I knew I couldn't rely on the family trust anymore, so I took steps to build my own security. I sought financial advice, set up my own investments, and began to make smarter choices about how I managed my money. The sense of independence was liberating. For the first time, I wasn't relying on anyone else to provide for me or to dictate the course of my life. But it wasn't just about money. It was about my emotional independence, too. I realized that I had spent so much of my life trying to live up to my father's expectations, to be the son he wanted me to be, that I had lost touch with who I really was. I started taking the time to explore my passions, to do things that made me happy, and to invest in relationships that were meaningful to me. I reconnected with old friends and made new ones who supported me, who encouraged me to grow and become the best version of myself. There were moments when the weight of everything still pressed down on me. I still felt the pain of my father's betrayal. And there were days when I longed for the comfort of the life I had known. But slowly, I began to see how much I had grown. I wasn't the same person I had been before the trust issue came to light. I was stronger, more self-aware, and more confident in my ability to handle whatever came my way. I also began to understand my father better, not as a figure of authority or a symbol of security, but as a flawed human being, just like me. I realized that he, too, had made mistakes and had struggled with his own sense of identity. For years, I had held him on a pedestal, expecting perfection. But now, I saw him as someone who was learning and growing, just like I was. We still had a long way to go, and there were moments when I wondered if we could ever fully rebuild the trust between us. But one thing had become clear. I didn't need to depend on him or anyone else for my happiness or sense of purpose. I was capable of creating my own future, one step at a time. In the end, the journey I had embarked on wasn't just about healing my relationship with my father. It was about learning to trust myself, to stand on my own, and to create a life that was mine. I wasn't defined by the trust or the family legacy anymore. I was defined by the choices I made, the growth I experienced, and the person I had become. And that, I realized, was the greatest gift of all. As I look back on everything that has happened, I realize just how much I've changed. The relationship with my father, though still complicated, has taken on a new dimension. There are moments of understanding now, where I see him not just as a figure of authority, but as a person with his own flaws, regrets, and complexities. We've started to rebuild our connection, but it's different. It's no longer about the family trust or legacy. It's about acceptance and respect. Two things we had both neglected for far too long. In many ways, I feel like I've been given a second chance, not just with my father, but with myself. The independence I've found, the growth I've experienced, have taught me that family isn't just about bloodlines or shared wealth. It's about the emotional connections we build, the trust we cultivate, and the love we give and receive, unconditionally. My sense of self-worth no longer relies on a trust fund or a family legacy. It's built on my own values, choices, and the journey I've undertaken to find myself. While the past still lingers in my mind, I no longer feel tethered to it. I've learned to let go of the things I cannot control and to embrace the future with a newfound strength. My relationship with my father will continue to evolve, but I'm no longer bound by the expectations that once defined me. Instead, I found peace in the knowledge that I can thrive on my own terms. Family, I've learned, is a fluid concept. It's not about perfection or adherence to a set path. It's about the love, understanding, and growth we experience together. And for that, I'm grateful. My journey isn't over, but I've learned that I'm capable of facing whatever comes next, with or without the family trust.